Hey, this is your host, Rick Houston. Before we get down to business in this week's episode, how about hitting those subscribe, like, and notification buttons? With all that out of the way, let's get on with the show. Davey Allison gets turned over at Pocono in 1992, and he's beaten up really bad. Anybody who was around at that time remembers the bloodshot eyes, remembers the broken hand and the Velcro on the steering wheel and the gear shift and all that for him to even be in the car. But you get lined up to get in the car under the first caution at Talladega. How did that come about?
Well, at the time, I did not have a full-time ride.
Right.
And so, when it happened, I think I immediately reached out to Robert Yates and, was lobbying for the job. And, me along with, 100 other drivers.
Yeah.
And so, I didn't really know until the last minute if I was going to get that opportunity. And I can't tell you behind the scenes how it happened, but evidently Robert and Larry McReynolds decided to put me in the car. And, that was a really good bright spot for me, is to come back and do so well in that race.
You're not supposed to cheer in the press box, but I was pulling for you that day because you had a well of a run. What do you remember about the race itself?
The two things I remember, three things I remember. One is that, coming from the back, Wally Dallenbach and I hooked up, and we, drafted together, and we just went from the back straight to the front. And then the second thing I remember was that me and Sterling Marlin and Ernie Irvin lapped the entire field, and that was unheard of back then. And so we literally were all on the lap by ourselves. And then the third thing I remember is that coming out of the pits, the last pit stop on the green, I think it was a gas and go only, or it might have been two right tires, but I think it was a gas and go only. But I couldn't get out of the pits because, I didn't have a locker rear end, and the other two guys had a locked rear end, and so I kept spinning the tires coming out of the pits. I couldn't get out of the pits, and that cost us from winning the race, and so we finished third instead of winning. And I think Robert Yates and all those guys were super happy anyway, but I was more frustrated because I felt like if I could have just gotten out of the pits under green, we would have had a chance to win that race, and it didn't happen, but it was still a great day.
You mentioned the fact that the 28 car, Robert Yates Racing, at that time was one of the two or three best cars in that garage. What was it like for you personally to drive that car that day?
Well, I knew it was going to be fast at Talladega, and I can remember going out on the track the first time in practice and just blowing by other cars, thinking, gosh, this is easy. Like, wow.
Yeah.
I had never experienced anything like this. And so it was that was probably one of the most exciting times of ever getting in a race car, was just that first practice session in that car, just how great it was and how fast it was. Now, what's interesting, though, is the following week we were going to Bristol. And I had the opportunity to drive the car at Bristol, and I thought I was going to get to race it. And so what happened was I practiced the car, and Davey practiced the car. And I ended up not getting to start the car because Davey was obviously going to start it for the points, but I was going to either get in one of the first or second cautions. And long story short, Davey ended up getting in a crash before I could ever get a chance to get in the car during the race. But the cool thing about that weekend was I got to practice the car, and was like right off the bat was one of the fastest cars in practice. And again, I was thinking, well, I don't know how, Robert Yates was known for his horsepower, and so I wasn't sure how much that was going to show up at Bristol. But what was amazing was just the car itself, and how well it drove, and how it had power, and it drove really well. I mean, again, I get in the car at Bristol, which is it's a short track. It's not even close to a super speedway. And I got in the car and just like, wow, this is easy. Man, this car is just good and fast. And so it was just a cool experience.